Good day, folks.
Hello. Welcome to Synthetic Things.
I'm Tim.
I'm Mitch. What are we looking at today, Tim?
Golly, we are looking at the Dave Smith Instruments OB-6.
In cooperation with Mr. Tom Oberheim. It's a pretty impressive synth, I have to say. It was quite the announcement at the 2016 NAMM show this year to see this amazing combination of synth pioneers come together to create this product for us. So we were lucky enough to get on the sound design team and have one ahead of time, so as you see with the rest of the DSI family up here. But this week we've been digging in hard. Make any cool patches?
I have made plenty of cool patches, and I can't wait to make more. You know, we did the Prophet 6 last year, which was my first real experience with doing this, and it was kind of eye-opening because you get about a week to try and slam a whole lot of patches together. And it's really kind of exciting at first because you're like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then you really just get into it, and it sort of becomes easier, at least I think, to just make sounds come out of it, because they're so fun to program that, you know, I can't speak for every synth out there, but the DSI stuff, it's really intuitive, really easy, and I really find myself having a hard time making a bad sound.
Yeah, that's what we both kind of found. I grew up on a Prophet 5, so I was really excited when the Prophet 6 came out. But just the interface in general, and the same goes for the OB-6, it's just so intuitive if you're into synths at all. And I'm not a synth genius. I've just been doing it for so long, I know where to go. But and that's nice because I do know where to go on this unit because it's very straightforward. And as Tim indicated, it's really hard to make a bad sound. In fact, we challenged ourselves to make a bad sound and
then make it musical.
Well, and even the ones that we came up with, it was like, that's a bad sound, but it was a good sound. So it was a lot of love for these machines for sure. And so far on this one, I think I came in, I had light experience with Oberheim because I'm old. I had actually touched an OB-8 and an OB-X, and I owned a Matrix 6 and a Matrix 1000. But the sound of this is...
You've had a lot of equipment over the years.
Well, I didn't own the good ones. I didn't have the 8 or the X, so I didn't have that. And I have messed around with the new 2-voice briefly from a friend of mine recently. But the sound of this thing is really, really impressive. And what of note for me was the first time I laid my hands on it at the NAMM show briefly, headphones, I ran through a bunch of patches and I was just kind of struck by how many sounds I recognized as, oh, that's a classic sound from this song from, you know, 80s, whatever, Thompson Twins or Foreigner or whoever, and I would just hear those sounds, and it didn't dawn on me that those were Oberheim sounds, I guess because I'm a Prophet guy. I'm Prophet-centric, so I always assumed they were all Prophet, but very different. And what are the differences that struck you from doing the Prophet 6 last year and doing this guy this year?
Well, the big difference is the filter. I mean, first of all, for those who don't know, the Prophet 6 has two filters. There's a low pass and a high pass filter. So you've got two filters going, whereas with the OB-6, you've got a single filter that's got multi-modes. And I grew up loving the sound of the Oberheim. I came from the 80s as well, but more of the rock side. So I grew up hearing Rush and Van Halen and people like that using it, so it was always kind of these big string sounds and things like this. And to the point that when I first got into synths, I had to go, well, not first got into it, but when I finally got an analog poly synth, I had to get an Alesis Andromeda because it was kind of the only thing out there that I could find that really came close to an Oberheim sound without getting a vintage piece of equipment. But the Andy has since become kind of a vintage piece itself.
And Andy is a great piece.
It is a fantastic synth.
It's an amazing synthesizer, but I am stunned so far at a lot of the sounds that you've been able to recreate from the Andy with a 6-voice synth as opposed to a 16-voice synth. It's really impressive. The sound of this thing is very thick. It's thick.
Yeah, some of the sounds that I did for the Prophet 6, or I'm sorry, for the OB-6, were actually sounds that I was trying to recreate from the Andromeda on the OB that were Andromeda sounds that were trying to go for an Oberheim sound. Are you still with me on this? Yeah. And some of them I really got pretty close, but there again, I've never actually owned an Oberheim, so I can't speak as to how accurate it was of an Oberheim. We tried to get an Oberheim in to kind of A/B them, and it almost happened, but
Right. And it's talking about what's awesome about this. Obviously, the Oberheim sound is there, and it is predominantly the filter.
the filter is fantastic.
The oscillators, it seems like there's some difference, but it's so hard to tell when you're running a raw oscillator against the other. But the filter is absolutely, and when you start modulating that filter and the modes on it, that's where the real magic and motion of the Oberheim sound comes in. For me, especially now listening to some of those older Oberheim sounds and going, yeah, that's totally where the magic. There's some more magic that they built into this guy though that is kind of surprising, and both of us were really struck and pleased with the addition of 2 new effects in the effects section, which are
Three new effects.
Are there 3? I thought it was just the 2.
The flanger.
Is there an extra one? I don't know, because I haven't paid attention to the Prophet, but I know the 2 main ones I'm talking about are the 2 new models in particular that are modeled off of Tom Oberheim's effects, his phaser from the Maestro and the Ring mod, and wow, those are really, really stunning and useful tools.
Ring mod is really important.
Yeah, and it's really awesome. I spoke with the guy who did the emulation while I was at the show, who's a friend of mine as well, Bob Coover, and he added on the Ring mod there is pitch tracking on the Ring mod, which is just outrageously cool and really nice because you can actually get it in tune and add some cool upper harmonics. It's almost like an extra oscillator.
Or you can take it way out of tune and get some crazy metallic kind of sounds.
Yeah, classic kind of Ring mod, but also with pitch tracking doing weird stuff.
And because there's 2 effects, the A and the B, you can actually stack 2 of the Ring mods on top of each other
and do different things with it.
And have one track and the other one not track, and you can get some really wild effects.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think the effects are pretty substantial for this unit. They were great on the Prophet as well. But that said, I find myself almost always turning them off because the raw sound of this unit is so fantastic. It's got punch and fatness and edge and all those things that you want from an analog synth. And not that the effects really ruin that, but you just don't get the same dramatic impact. At least that's what I found.
No, I found myself when I was building patches feeling like I needed to add effects so that, since it's going into the factory patches, that people would have some idea of what the effects could do to it. But a lot of them, I would build it, make some sort of effect for it, and then shut it off because all by itself, it was just a really dynamic sound, really big.
And I find that, the effects are really nice to enhance it when you're just sitting here playing it. But when you're putting it into a track, which we've done as well, raw is just really nice. Everything goes together so well. And I say raw, I mean raw. But what else?
Well, in the effects section, this also has the spring reverb in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also get the spring sound. So
see, that's important.
It's really important.
That's the important stuff.
Sometimes I feel like I need to put some spring reverb in a patch just so that while you're playing, you can smack the side of the thing and get that sound.
See, that's just the kind of geeky stuff that makes us love Dave Smith instruments so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave.
And I didn't find that right away. I read about it in a review of the Prophet 6, and the first thing I did when I got this was make sure that they added that feature in there.
Awesome. So let's see, what else do we need to
I did
cover
want
on
to say a couple more things about the filter.
Sure.
More than one of the big differences I noticed is the resonance on this is really an aggressive resonance, more so than any other analog synth that I've really had or played.
I will agree with that, and I'll say that strangely enough, it's more aggressive and yet strangely far more usable and musical than some of the really aggressive ones. Like I've got an SH-101 that I've had. It's got a very aggressive resonance, but a lot of times it's just out of control. And this thing, strangely, you can crank it up and still very usable kinds of sounds.
I think part of that is because it's not a self-oscillating filter. It allows you to crank it up and get really aggressive type of filtering without having to have that self-oscillation in there. I think that is probably part of it.
It may be. It may very well be. And also because it seems like We both mentioned this as we were doing sounds, that it feels like when you really start cranking up the oscillator section and the resonance and stuff, you're getting some overdrive and saturation between those sections that, you know, the Prophet has its own dedicated distortion, which this unit does not, or if it has one, it's hidden, and we have not yet
We
found
didn't find it.
We didn't find it, so it's a secret to us at this point if it's there. But we definitely get some distortion by really cranking stuff up in both the mixer section and the filter section. That is very pleasant, very usable, very much enhancing the sound, in my opinion. So
There's a difference between this and the Andromeda. I don't really want to compare two separate machines like that too much, but I did a couple of patches that were taking straight from, you know, trying to imitate things I'd done on the Andromeda and things I'd done on the Prophet. And I found myself having to dial the oscillators way back because they were just driving the filter so much harder on this. And you don't notice it with the others. It doesn't drive it quite as hard.
yeah,
Or at least that's my experience.
the Prophet is definitely powerful, but I don't feel the same thing, and it could be wrong. It could just be, you know, impressions and my romance or whatever, because I haven't dug in, I haven't asked the questions, but it definitely feels like this drives harder internally without having to have an external distortion to do those types of things. But
Which is great because I personally, I prefer internal distortion.
yeah, I mean,
If I can drive it from inside, I would rather drive from inside.
to the point, I would love to see, you know, some way to get some more gain and push it even harder.
Yeah.
So if that's possible,
That would be fantastic.
yeah.
The sub oscillator really adds some beef at the bottom end. I use the noise a lot.
I use the noise a lot.
It adds a lot of sizzle when, especially when you're doing high pass
Now,
patches.
probably a good time to talk about some of the things that, you know, a lot of people have already been talking about, shortcomings of this box. You know, it can't, no synth can do everything. There's no way around it. And I enjoyed some of the limitations of the Prophet because I grew up on a Prophet, so I was already used to them. And so in fact, I didn't have limitations. I had new stuff to play with that was amazing and fantastic. So that was exciting. Coming into this box, I definitely found myself wanting some more modulation. There's no doubt about it. But I'm a nut for modulation, and I'm spoiled because, as you see, I've got these other DSI units around, and there's a ton of modulation on all of them. Totally understand that they were going for a classic vibe, classic kind of sound, and, you know, basically taking advantage of they already had this architecture, and they're putting a new oscillator, a new filter in it, and creating a very close to classic, reminiscent sound of an OB poly, and it certainly is that. I mean, we both experienced the fact that it sounds like an Oberheim poly.
And that's one of the things, I think, because the limitations of this are different than, say, the limitations, you know, like in the old Oberheims had multiple LFOs, and the Prophet 6 I felt like was kind of the next generation of the Prophets. Like you had the Prophet 5 and then you had the Prophet 6, and it was sort of the next step in the evolution. Whereas I don't feel that the OB-6 is sort of the OB-XA or the OB-8's, you know, younger sibling. It feels like it's a related product, but it's not a direct descendant per se.
Well, I guess technically it could be that. I mean, we went from an 8 voice down to a 6 voice again because of.
Of course, those came in 6 voice and 4 voice as well.
See, I don't know anything about history and the Oberheims. I was such a Prophet-centered guy. But anyway, I mean, it's limitation. Yeah, I mean, I can address a couple of them very quickly. The size of the keyboard. People, you know, want the 61 keys. I don't have a problem with that. If you notice, I have zero problem with the shorter keyboards. I'm not an organ player, chord player that much. I'm mostly monophonic kind of guy anyway, so don't do a ton of that. That doesn't bother me at all. I understand why people want it. You know, weighted keys.
I'm one.
Yeah.
I like a wider keyboard, and it does concern me more with this one than it did with the Prophet, but it's not going to stop me from actually purchasing a unit.
I can see that, in particular because this thing is so strong with strings and brass and things like that. I can see where having the extra range would really make a huge difference playing those types of sounds. So yeah, I get it, but again, for me, no big deal. Limitation of 6 voices. I would love to have more voices. That would be amazing. But the one that gets me the most is modulation, because there's so much stuff. I would kill for an assignable LFO. I would kill for an extra assignable envelope.
There's a difference. Speaking of
Yeah, well-
LFOs, I meant to mention this earlier. The LFO on the Prophet 6 is a triangle wave.
Right.
And the LFO on the OB is a sine wave.
Yeah.
And there's a noticeable difference in modulation between the two.
And same thing. What's the sub on this is a sine or square?
It's a square wave, I think.
Okay, but it's a sine on this. The subs are different.
Yes,
I don't
they
remember
are.
exactly which direction they go, but
I believe this is a square. It seemed to me I noticed that a
I
couple
think you're right.
times.
I think you're right. I'm bad. I came into this video not looking that up. But the sub oscillators are different on the two units, so all of those things kind of combine together
And
too.
the second oscillator also has a
Triangle.
sine, or a triangle
Yeah.
wave.
It has a triangle where the Prophet didn't have it.
Exactly.
So I think those are all the differences. There's a filter. There's definitely something different about the oscillators, whether it's a giant impact or a minimal impact. It's there. The LFO.
The cross mod is a very cool.
Yep. Cross mod's different from the poly mod on the Prophet, but yeah. So as far as nothing new is going to be added to this because we're laid out. We're playing it now. We're making sound, so we're accepting the limitations as challenges. And so far, I've really enjoyed.
I've had a great time.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
I
So,
keep hoping that they won't tell us to ship it to the next guy.
Yeah, so don't tell them that we still have it, no matter what you do. All right, make sure you check out our other video, which is just sounds instead of us gabbing the whole freaking time. So you can check out.
Although this one is pretty fun.
This one's amazing. I mean, you get to look at us for who knows how long we've been going. But yeah, check out the other video. It's all sounds, no talking, and you get to check out some of the patches that we created and probably hear a whole bunch of things that they won't accept because we had to make so many of them. We don't expect all of them to make it.
I do.
Yeah, although, why wouldn't they? They're just amazing.
All of them golden.
That's synthetic things. Just like all of our records, our patches are also sheer gold.
100%.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Of course it doesn't.
There it is. Just needed a good punch. I just punched a synth I don't own.